Hello and welcome back everyone to yet another lesson in web development. Today's lesson will be wrapping up our core project, and in today's lesson we'll be dealing with front-end data management. For the most part, we've always interfaced with our data, at least in terms of updating our data via the database. Today we're going to manage all of that through the user interface. Now, with that being said, let's have a look at the objectives for today's lesson. Now, as mentioned before, we'll be managing the data via our user interface, and we'll be using PHP to script some functionality so that we can actually grab that data and essentially add employees using a form. We know that we already have a form, so all we have to do in today's lesson is tweak our existing scripts so that we can combine our PHP and our HTML code so we can upload employees to the database. Now, without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, before we start scripting in Atom, the first thing I'm going to do is take the previous lesson that we worked on and I'm going to copy this. And you need to make sure that you are in the location where you installed XAMPP under the htdocs file. So in my case, that was C drive XAMPP htdocs. Remember, this is the folder where we serve our PHP documents. So I'm going to copy this over here and then I'm going to paste it. And then I'll just rename this to L7, which is a reflection of today's lesson. And essentially the reason I'm doing this is because we are going to continue working from the previous batch of scripts. So just to make sure that we have the previous batch of scripts intact, I decided just to make a copy of that and then just work from there. So this is going to be our new environment. Now going forward, I'm actually going to open up Atom so that we can start scripting. So once you've booted up Atom, we can go ahead and actually bring that folder into our environment. So over here, I'm going to say open folder. Instead of open file, we want to open an entire folder. I'm going to go up one level and I'm going to open up that folder that we just created. So I'll click on select folder and this is going to be my environment. You'll notice that the code is exactly as from the previous lesson, which is exactly what we want. So the first thing I want to do is create a brand new script, and this script is going to be called a submit script. So let's go ahead and do exactly that. So over here, I'll say new file, and then I'll also save this file as PHP. So this is going to be submit.php. Now, much like we had this handler over here that we used to connect to our database, we are going to include that handler inside of our submit form as well. So what I'll do is head over to index, just copy this over here and bring that into my submit script or file over here. And again, the reason for this is so that we can access that handler to do all the heavy lifting when we submit data to our database. So next I'm going to access my index.php script and I'm going to do a bit of refactoring over here to make sure that my submit functionality is going to be compatible with what I have in my index.php. So I'm looking for the add employee modal, which is the modal that pops up when we click on add employee. And first things first, I'm going to actually refactor this so that this over here will be a form instead of just input button. So I'll take all of this code over here, I'll cut this out, and then I'll create a form. And inside of the forms braces over here, I'll just paste that code in again. Great, so let's start cleaning all of this up. So I'll just bring this up slightly over here as well as over here. So for the class, I'm going to pretty much leave this empty because I don't need a class for this form. I'm not planning on using CSS or JavaScript in any way on this specific form. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the action over here to submit.php, and then I'm going to remove the HTML bit over here. So I'm also going to change the method, or I'll keep the method as post. Let's maybe just make this uppercase. And what's happening here essentially is that when the form is submitted, we are listening for a specific action, and that action is submit.php, and the method being used is a post method. If you remember from previous lessons in PHP, the post method or variable is a super global. So the idea behind this is that when I click submit, I'm going to be listening for whatever functionality is going to be scripted in my submit PHP script over here. So now let's head back over to our index.php and let's start to refactor the code over here. You'll notice that from our dashboard, And let's just refresh this quickly. We also want to make sure that we are listening to the script in L7 and not L6 from our previous lesson, which essentially is going to be the same. So if I click on add employee over here, the first input field asks me to supply a first name. But when we structured our database, keep in mind that we also had a column that took in an employee number. So we need to refactor our HTML code so that we can actually add an additional input field here that listens for an employee number. So I'll just minimize this and I'll copy what I already have and I'll simply paste it over here. And what you'll notice is that it has a label, much like all of the others. It has an input field and it has a break tag. So associated with this input field is this attribute called name over here. And that is employee-number. Now the name is how we are actually able to reference something in PHP over here in this script so that we can grab the value from whatever the user inputs into this input field over here. And then we can take that specific value and push it to the database. Now there are a couple of things missing inside of this form. Although this input field has a name, the others do not. So let's actually go and add a couple of names for each and every one of these input fields over here. And I'm going to copy these input fields so that you don't have to watch me type them out from scratch. I think that just makes a lot more sense. So I'm going to start with the first name input field for this one over here. And I'm going to add the name attribute with first name. I'll do the same for last name, which is going to be this one over here. Simply copy and paste. I'll do one for the position as well. I'll paste that over here. And then one for the department, which is going to be added over here. And then the last two will be the email as well as the salary. So once we have these name references, we can actually start putting them into our submit script over here so that we can do all the heavy lifting with our PHP. So I'm going to give it a bit of regular state over here and head back to the top. And now I'm going to add my PHP code. So just below the include once line, I'm going to create a new variable of employee number. And I'm going to set this equal to my super global, which is of type post, and open up square braces over here. And I'm going to add in the employee number as my reference, which is this one over here. So I'll actually just copy this, head back over, add my quotation marks, and then very, very important, always close off your expressions or your line of code with your semicolon in PHP where it is required. Then I'm going to move over to the first name. So first name. I'm going to set this equal to that post variable as well. Open up my braces and then just head back over and I'll grab the first name over here and I'll paste that in right here. Excellent. Next, I'm going to do the last name. I'm going to set this equal to my post variable. Open up my square braces, add in my quotation marks, and this was called last name. And let's just make sure that this is the case, so last name. If I hit over, that's correct. I'll grab position in the meantime, and then I'll do the exact same over here. Position, and I'm simply going to set this equal to my, you've guessed it, my post variable. Open my square braces and paste in position. And then we have three more. We also need to add the department. So over here, I'll do department. I'm going to set this equal to, again, my post underscore, and this one is going to be department. Excellent. Let's just make sure that that is the case. So department. Wonderful. Now I'm going to copy the final two variables because by now you should have a fairly good idea of what's happening over here. So I'll save that now, and now we can actually start writing our SQL code. So I'm going to create a new SQL statement over here. So this is going to be SQL statement, and you should not be confusing this SQL statement with the one that we actually wrote in our index PHP file in our previous lesson. And I'm going to set this equal to a SQL script or a SQL line of code. Now, if you recall from our previous lesson, we had a SQL query over here. So instead of doing a select, what I'm going to do now is an insert operation. So I'll actually copy and paste everything that I already have, and we can just add that in here, and I'll walk you through exactly what's happening. So let's just paste that over here. And if you remember from previous lessons, we worked with update statements, insert statements. We also worked with select statements. In this example, we are simply working with an insert statement to manage our data from the front end so that we can push it to the back end. So all we are saying is insert into employers, then we call the correct names of the columns. Now these names, these column names are exactly the same as the column names that we have over here: employee number, last name, first name, department code, job title, salary, and email. So the idea behind this is that if I head back over to my script over here I'm calling department code. Now the reason I'm calling department code and the reason I'm associating it with department over here is because I'm actually building a join. I'm joining something when I call it from my select statement over here. So again, from our previous lesson, we used the department code as a way to build relationships so that we can select and retrieve the associated department. So let's just head back over to our database. If I go to my departments over here, every department has a code, and each code is associated with a name such as technology, transport, marketing, and executive, as well as sales. So if I head back over here, let's actually just refresh this. This is where I'm retrieving all of that from. So the idea here is that when I add an employee, instead of adding the department name, I'm going to add the department code, which will be one of these codes, 1 to 5, because they are my primary keys in my departments table, and they are foreign keys in my employees table. So the goal here is to add one of these department codes in the department field over here, but then what gets retrieved is the department name associated with each code. So it's quite important to separate the select statement from these list items over here from the form insert statement that we are going to be running over here. Okay, that's very, very important. So now let's head back over to Atom, and inside my script, what I'm going to do now is head back over to my submit script. And again, let's just review this code. So I'm inserting values, the number, the employee number, the first name, the last name, the position, the department code, the email, and the salary. Okay, so it's quite important that you don't get confused between the difference of the department name and the department code, because the department code again is being used as a join to select our items. I hope that makes sense. So in a new line over here, I'm going to call that MySQL I object, which is the query object or the function or the method. And I'm going to pass in two parameters, and you've guessed it. The first is going to be my DB connection, and that I'm retrieving from here, my DB include script. And then the second parameter is going to be the actual SQL statement to run this query. So over here, I'll just say SQL, and I'm going to say statement over here. Great, so let's save that, and let's just close this off over here. And one other thing to note is that the values that I'm actually going to be passing in is the values that we've stored inside of these variables. Now, the values that we store inside of these variables are being retrieved from my input fields, and those are being supplied as the values that I want to insert into my database under these columns over here. Great. So now we've got one more line of code to add, and that is the header object, which is just going to allow me to redirect to the index.php file once the data has been submitted. So what I'm going to say in my quotation marks is location, And the location I want to go to is the index.php, add a question mark, submission is equal to success. So then I know that my data has successfully been stored. So then let's just add our semicolon over here. So we have location, index.php, question mark, submission is equal to success. Excellent. So heading back over to the index.php script, what I need to add is my type of button over here. Now my type of button as it currently stands is just a normal button, but I need to change this to a submit button so that it can actually submit the data. So going from a normal button, I'm going to change the type of this button in this add employee modal to submit. And then I'll save all of this. Fingers crossed. Let's head back over to our dashboard and let's test our code. So let's navigate to our front end. Let's just refresh everything. So we have a fresh start. I'm going to add an employee now. I'm going to give this employee a number of 1001 perhaps. And then the first name could be something like Jack Stevens. And the position could be something like a web developer. And the department is, if we have a look over here, we can see that the technology department has a code of 1. So I'm going to add in 1 over here. Then I'm going to give Mr. Stevens an email address, and that's going to be jstevens@jcoaches.com. And we'll give him a generous salary of, let's say, £25,000. And then I'll hit confirm. And you'll notice that Jack Stevens has been added over here. And that is exactly what we want. If we have a look at our database and we refresh our database, if we head over to employees, we can see that Mr. Stevens has been added over here. And if I refresh this page now, the data persists. And this is exactly what we want. This is why databases are so powerful and so useful. In the event that we need to manage and store data throughout an organizational system, for example, so that we can manage and manipulate that data at a later stage. This is often useful when you perform things like data analytics, or if you want to build dashboards like we've done over here, just to keep track of all of our data. You'll notice that we haven't covered the interviews over here, the upcoming interviews list over here. And I decided not to cover this simply because I wanted to give you a challenge. Now, the logic to complete all of this and to add all of this to the database is going to be pretty much the same as what we've covered through our previous lessons. All you have to do essentially is, you've got the interviews table over here. All you have to do is work with the same logic where we added an employee. You now need to use that exact same logic and pretty much the code more or less to actually add the interviews over here. And I do believe that having challenges in place really help you practice your coding skills so that you eventually become better as you progress. In our final lesson, we're going to have a look at some of the popular web development frameworks out there that you should probably be looking at once you've completed this course. Web frameworks are really, really popular and really, really powerful tools to expedite the web development process. So for all of that and more, I'll see you in the next lesson. Cheers.